Our scripture lesson comes to us from Matthew's Gospel, one of Jesus' confrontations with the rulers of the day. Beginning with verse 34, we read, "When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. 'Teacher, which commandment in the law is greatest?' And he said to him, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets.' Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question. 'Now, what do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he?' And they said to him, 'Well, the son of David.' And he said to them, 'How is it then that David by the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet? If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be his son?' Now no one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions." This is the word of God for the children of God. Thanks be to God.
Well, before we jump into this sermon this morning, I hope that you will allow me. I want to share a personal announcement with the church. When I arrived here, I said that one of my first goals was going to be to help increase and grow the children's ministry. And I just want to let you know that I took that very seriously, and Lindsay is going to be having a baby in July. So now, I know many of you already know that because our toddler went to the youth group about 3 weeks ago and told every single one of them that mommy had a baby in her belly. So the word was out. Can't keep a secret. So if you want to know anything about us, just go ask Isaac and he'll tell you whatever you want to know. But every year at the beginning of the year, I like to cast a vision for that particular year. I think it helps us as a church if we just kind of have a really high-level altitude view of some things that we want to accomplish over the next 12 months or so. And this doesn't necessarily mean that we're just going to do it for a year, but it's a place that we need to start. And so what I want to do is first I'm going to break down this text like we normally would, and then talk a little bit about how I think this text is going to tie into some of the ministries that we're going to be engaging in 2018. So at the start of our story, we see that the Pharisees are a little upset with Jesus. He got the Sadducees all confused. He kind of tripped them up on their own words. Jesus was one sneaky cat. And so they decided that they were going to shut this guy up once and for all. And what do you do when you want to make somebody be quiet? You hire an attorney, right? And so they go out and they find a lawyer friend of theirs, and they come in and they think they're going to trick Jesus. And they say, "Jesus, which one of the commandments is the most important commandment of all? Is not murdering somebody, is that the most important one? Is not committing blasphemy the most important one?" There is a little over 600 different laws in the Jewish law. And they're saying, "Jesus, of those 600, which one would you put as number one?" Now, of course, they're already missing the very point of everything that Jesus taught, because what Jesus was trying to tell us through his entire ministry was it's not so much the law that matters. You can obey every aspect of the law and still not be fulfilling it, because it's not following the rules that's the most important thing. It's what's in your heart. Jesus says if you lust after someone, you've already committed adultery, because you're already moving in that direction. And so when the Pharisees come and say, "Jesus, which one of these is the most important?" Well, in some ways, he's going to say none of them, because what's most important is what lives inside of you. He often described them as whitewashed tombs, dead on the inside. So they ask him, "Jesus, which one's the most important?" And he at first appears like he's going to play their game. And he says an answer that would have been common to this question, Well, the most important thing is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, the Shema. It's a common answer. But then he doesn't stop there. He says, and there's another one that's just like it. You need to love your neighbor just like you love yourself. Because, see, it's not enough to just love God if you don't live out that love in a physical and tangible way. So he tells us three things. Love God, love yourself, and love other people. And it's a really hard teaching when you really get down to it. I mean, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Can any of us honestly say that we're doing that? That I love God with my entire heart. I mean, I love God a lot. And I wish that I loved God with my entire heart. But I can't say that I always do. I mean, just this past Christmas season, it's Christmas, for Pete's sake. It's supposed to be all about Jesus, right? And I'm getting upset with somebody at the mall because they took my parking spot. And all of a sudden, that love God with all of my heart went right out the window when I had my blinker on, and they slid right on in. I wanted to show them the love of Jesus, all right, as I called fire down on them, right? So quickly, we get to the point where, oh, I'm praising God with my mouth, and I want to exalt you, and I want to love you, and I want to be everything that I can be for you too. You stole my parking spot, you fill in the adjective, right? We all try to love God with our entire hearts, but I think if we're honest, we all sometimes fall short. I mean, is there anybody in here that can say, I always love God with my entire heart, and I got this Christianity thing totally figured out? Even the choir. No, we love God with our entire heart by living into the gospel message of death and resurrection. As I'm mad at the person for taking my parking spot, I have to go, Josh, this is something trivial. God called you to love your enemies, and he just took a parking spot. Get over yourself. And as we die to ourselves and allow God to raise us to new life, we slowly and surely walk more and more and more into our love of God. And it's only in a love of God, out of a love of God, that we have any hope of loving ourselves. If I don't love God and I don't trust God to deal with my shortcomings and show me grace and give me mercy, then I can never take a real look at myself. And that's the second part of this commandment, and we don't often talk about this in the church. But we need to love ourselves. In fact, we can't love our neighbor if we don't love ourselves. How many times have we seen somebody who was really hurt, really wounded in some way, and does not love themselves? And out of that lack of love for themselves, they sow hatred and other things towards other people, right? Sometimes it's if we're really judgmental towards ourselves, we're going to be really judgmental towards other people. If I hate myself, there's a good chance that I'm going to be hateful towards other people. It's often how we view ourselves that's going to affect how we view others. It's so important. And then, so we have first and foremost this love of God, which helps us have a love of ourselves. But if we only love ourselves, then that's a problem too, right? And so the final part of that is we are called to love our neighbor. We're called to love our neighbor just like we love ourselves. And when you really think about this, Jesus had a unique perspective. Because here is Jesus saying, love God with all your heart. And as he's saying this, he's of the same substance that God is. He's saying, love God, and he is God. He's the only one that really knows what it means to truly love God with all your heart. And at the same time, he's saying, love yourself. And he knows what it means to love yourself. He was human. He knows what it means to have human emotions and to feel anger and to feel insecurity and to feel hatred. He knows what that means. And he also knew what it meant to be a neighbor. You see, Jesus had one hand on God and one hand on humanity. And he wasn't willing to let either one of those pieces go. And he's calling us to do the same thing, to have a deep love for all three. Which brings us to our mission and our purpose for 2018. The mission and the purpose of First Church for 2018 will be to equip every member, every person in this building, to equip anyone that's here to love God, to love themselves, and to love their neighbor. Pretty simple. Our mission in 2018 is to equip anyone that comes into this place to love God with all their heart, to love themselves, and to love their neighbor. So let's talk a little bit about how we're going to do this, because we can say it all day long and go, yeah, that sounds right to me, but if we don't do anything about it, nothing's going to happen. So the first one is a little bit challenging. We want to empower people to love God with all of their heart. Now, God's pretty big, and there are many ways to connect to God. We don't all connect to God in the same way. Some of us pray differently, so we connect to God in different worship styles. Some of us connect to God through one type of service, while another one would connect to God through a different type of Christian service. There's many ways to connect to God. But I think there's one overarching theme that we see throughout the New Testament that helps people connect to God. And there's probably many, but we're going to talk about this one. And that is their deep relationships with each other. Through holding each other accountable, through having an authentic relationship with each other, we can help one another grow in our love for God. And so what we want to do is we want to start life groups up. And they're going to be starting primarily in the fall, actually. But what these groups are going to be is they're going to be opportunities for us to be authentic with one another, for us to talk about the real struggles that we have in our life. I mean, we come to church and we go, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. How are you doing? And we may be going through something traumatic. We may be having a real trial, but 90% of the time we're going to say, I'm good, because it's just not the time or the place to get into it, right? I mean, we know we can't have those conversations in the narthex in 2 minutes. And so this will be a chance for us to say, I'm not good. I'm dealing with this. I'm really questioning my faith in this area. I've just been beat up so much this year. I've had so many trials. I'm struggling to even believe. Can you pray with me? Can you help me? Or on the flip side, it may be, I'm so happy because this is going on in my life, and I'm seeing God's glory, and I'm seeing God's goodness. And we need to have a place to voice those things. There are primarily 3 types of groups that you're going to find in the life of a church. And I'll be honest with you, First Church has an A+ in 2 of the 3. The first one are just social groups. They're really important. It's where we get to know one another. It's where we start to build and learn each other's interests. For example, dart ball or choir. Places where we go and we can interact and talk and commune with each other. So important. And I think we knock those areas out of the park. Another one where I think we really thrive is informational types of groups. Sunday school classes, Bible studies in the evening. We have some of the best teachers I've ever seen. If your kid is in Sunday school or in children's church here, I'm telling you, I've seen other children's departments that aren't half as good as this one. The 412 program, top notch. I am so grateful that my son is in the nursery here where they don't just rock them and play games with them, but they actually teach them things. It's so good, high quality stuff. And then the last type of group are spiritual groups. And these are groups where we get to know one another spiritually. We get to know those places that I just talked about. And if you look at it, I'm not saying that that stuff doesn't happen here, because I know it does. But it largely happens organically through people meeting outside of the church and doing it on their own. We don't have any formal way through the life of our church to connect to each other in those ways. And that's what these groups are. And through doing that, and through sharing our concerns and sharing our joys, we will connect to God deeper. It will help us to grow in our love for God. It will allow us to talk about those places where we don't love God with our entire lives, and allow us to hold each other accountable and help each other to grow, because we all need that. None of us have arrived. Which brings me to point number 2, loving ourselves. As I said earlier, there's no way that we can love other people without first having a healthy love of ourselves. And so these groups at first listen may seem a little counterintuitive, because rightfully so, the church is often focused on outreach. And these groups are intentionally inwardly focused. They're intentionally focused on people who are already part of this community of faith right here. But we need to do that because if we're not grounded and rooted in a love of one another and in a love of God, how will we ever have anything to offer to our neighbor? We have to build healthy relationships with ourselves if we ever hope to have healthy relationships with our neighbor. And so we're going to be doing things in this next year that are going to be focused on people who attend First Church. Now, of course, everyone is welcome. Don't hear me say that we're trying to be exclusive or keep people out or build up walls. Absolutely not. But what it is it's us saying that our relationships with each other are important, and our relationships with each other are going to be what helps us grow in our relationship with God. Because Jesus called us to make disciples, not to make neighbors. Are you following me? Jesus called us to make disciples, not just to make friends. And if we don't do the discipleship piece here, all we're going to be doing is producing neighbors and friends, and we're not going to see the fruit that we desire. So we connect to God through our relationships with each other. We take care of ourselves through our relationships with each other. But that doesn't exclude us from loving our neighbor as ourselves. But if you think about it, if the primary way in 2018 that we're loving God as a church is through building godly relationships and holding each other accountable, if the primary way we're taking care of ourselves as a church is getting into these relationships and helping ourselves grow, then it would only make sense that the way that we should love our neighbor as ourselves is relationally. And at times, if we're not careful, this is what outreach can look like. Let me use this. Alden doesn't have any hand sanitizer. I have hand sanitizer. So I go over here, and I say, would you like some hand sanitizer? So I give him some, and then I leave. I don't know his name. I don't know anything about his life. I don't know his struggles. I don't even know how to sew in beyond giving him hand sanitizer. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There's a place to minister and to do ministry like that. But it's not the only thing. We have to grow beyond that. And we have a few ministries like that. We have Loaves and Fishes that meets here every week. Great opportunity to build relationships. But let me be honest with you. Even I'm not there enough to be building the relationships that I need to be building. And it's something that I hope to work on in 2018. We have Family Promise, where you have an opportunity for a week to build relationships with people that are marginalized and homeless, and going there and meeting those women. Oh my goodness, some incredible women come through that program. But in 2018, we want to start a new focus, and we've mentioned this already. We're working in partnership with Wapak Elementary and hoping to start a tutoring program here in early February. And the goal of that is twofold. One, to build relationships with kids. And two, to ensure that every kindergartner is ready for the first grade. Can you imagine how hard it would be scholastically to ever get ahead if you start the race behind? I mean, if you start out behind in the first grade, chances are you're going to be behind the rest of your life. It's a critical year for kids. It's where you learn all the basics. If you don't learn the basics that you need, you can never do the advanced things. And so First Church, we're giving these kids a valuable gift. Probably the two most valuable things you can give anybody in our society. We're giving them the love of God and the chance for an education. What a wonderful gift. And so we're going to be doing this on Wednesday nights. And then out of that, we now have somebody who's volunteering. Miss Quincy is volunteering to help us expand our 412 program so that we can do 412 for every age in the church. And so parents will be able to come and allow their kindergartners to be tutored. And then they'll be invited to stay, and their kids can interact with our kids at 412 and learn all about Jesus and the love that he has for their life. And in between those two things, we hope to start a meal where people from our church who are engaged in these small groups, people from 412, people in this tutoring program can come together and dine together. And we can get to know one another. And we can begin to build relationships with each other. And you can see how this will begin to operate. We interact with their children. We give their children education. We show their children the love of God. And through that, we build a relationship with the family. And through building the relationship with the family, we invite them to the meal. And as we're eating with them at the meal, we invite them to our life groups. And as they interact with us in our life groups, they become ingrained in the life of our church, and they grow more and more into the love of Jesus Christ. See how it works? We love God. We love ourselves. And out of the overflow of those first two, we love our neighbor. It's the gospel. It's the gospel with skin on it. It's how we're going to live into the gospel this year. Now, you may be saying, Josh, this sounds like a lot of work. There's a lot of moving parts here, and how are we ever going to do it? And you're right, we can't do it with just the volunteer base that we have right now. But I am confident we've already had people step up before we even mentioned it, willing to fill some of these roles. Everything's in place. We just need each person to plug in. If we all plug into this vision, we will do more than we can even imagine right now in this moment of time. John, can you put that picture up for me? This is a photo of our sanctuary at the early service Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, we had over 500 people sitting in those pews between the three services. Over 500 people. More than enough people to do this mission and more. Now, why did we have 500 people here on December 24th? And we have about 200 people here any other time. Why? Well, the easy answer is, it's Christmas Eve, silly. Right? But really, the real reason why we had over 500 people here on Christmas Eve, and we have 200 any other time, is because on Christmas Eve, Jesus is important. On Christmas Eve, Jesus is important. On Christmas Eve, I'm calling my kids saying, you better be here because it's Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, people call and say, I got to get to church. I may not go to church any other time, but it's Christmas Eve. I got to be there. And you know what? Not only was it Christmas Eve, it was snowing outside. The roads were terrible. It was cold. If it was a normal Sunday, the attendance would be cut by a third. But it was Christmas Eve, and we got to go because Jesus is important on Christmas Eve. But let me tell you, Jesus is just as important on January 7th as he is on December 24th. And if we act like it, we'll see December 24th every week of the year. But when we only get excited about church once a year, when we only get revved up for church, well, twice, there's Easter. But when we only get revved up about church once or twice a year, no wonder we don't see the growth. We have to have an excitement. We have to have something to plug into. And if we can't get excited about showing children the love of Jesus and reaching their families, I don't know what else we can get excited about. And so my hope and my prayer is that every single one of us will plug into these things just like we would never imagine missing a Christmas Eve service. If we get that same energy, if we can get that same life, we will see our community and our world transformed. And so I want to close with giving you a general timeline. This isn't set in stone, but give you kind of a general idea on how this is going to unfold. In February, we are starting the tutoring. So that's going to be starting up in February. We're hoping by early spring to begin training life group leaders. So if that sounds like something, as I was talking about it, that you may be interested in, give me a call. Calling does not lock you in. We're just talk about it. So we're going to start training our life group leaders in early spring and begin doing our meals in the late spring, probably May, so that we can do 3 or 4 of them, see how they work. And the goal is by September, every single one of these things will be going full tilt, launched, ready to go. And if we all buy in, it will work. And if we don't buy in, we'll see what God does. But my hope and my prayer is that this is something that resonates with your soul. This is something that you can get excited about. And this is something that we can live into together in the coming year. May it be true in your life and in mine. Amen.